life as a follower of Jesus. And in 2026, we also need that clarity as well. What it means to be a faithful Christian, a wise Christian. And so these two stories are going to help us to grow in being more ready for Jesus. So we're going to read these verses. I'm going to read them out loud, these two stories. Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 to 30. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. But when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, "Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more." His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, "Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more." His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, "Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours." But his master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." These are God's words. We get to look at these 2 stories together this morning about what it means to be ready for Jesus' return. So I've got illustration here. It's a little bit difficult in our bright sunlight today to see it, but we've got a picture here of the first story, which are the 10 virgins with their lamps waiting for the bridegroom to arrive. Just so we understand what's going on with this story, we've got these 10 young women. That's really who they are, 10 young women. They are not getting married. They are there to celebrate the marriage. The bride is somewhere else. And typically in the first century, you would have the bridegroom going first to celebrate with the bride's family, and then there would be another celebration with his own family. And so in between there might be a procession where the bridegroom and his party come back to their place for the great celebration. And so these 10 young women have the job of being ready to light up the place with their torches. Looking at some of the illustrations here, you can see like a little jar of oil with a little candle light coming out of it. I actually don't think it was like that. I think that those lamps were more like torches to light up a place big enough for a party. And then you would have to supply that fire torch with oil to keep the rag wrapped around the top flammable. And so you just had that set up to be ready to have your light on when the bridegroom arrives. However, the story tells us that the bridegroom was delayed. Now that's not a surprise because the time frame in those days was different. I was at a wedding a while back locally where the invitation said to be at the place at this certain time. Okay, so we'll show up, and I don't want to arrive right on time because that would be embarrassing. I want to show up ahead of time. So we show up maybe half an hour ahead of the time. We sit down. Come to find out that the time on the invitation was actually the time to assemble. The actual time, it seemed like it was an hour later. So we sat there for an hour and a half waiting for the wedding to begin. And I can understand from their point of view, they wanted everyone to be ready early. But this was the opposite problem. The bridegroom's arrived late, or he's delayed. And that's not unusual in that culture. Because he's delayed, they all fell asleep. Okay? That's not a problem. That's not a problem. All right? It took a long time, sometime in the night, they all fell asleep. The problem happens next. Because in the story, suddenly, the announcement, they're coming! Get ready! And the 10 young women who have these torches lit, 5 of them realize that their torches are going out because the oil that they had originally supplied, there's nothing left. So the torches are flickering, they're going out. And so the foolish 5 say to the wise 5, give us some of your oil. But there's not going to be enough. If they do that, they're all going to go out. So the wise ones say, go to the shops, get some more oil, come back. That's the best thing you can do. Now the foolish 5 go out to the dealer, but the story says when they came back, the door was shut. The bridegroom had already arrived. And the 5 foolish knock on the door, let us in. And the master says, I don't know you. Right? Now again, this is where I think the story is making Jesus' point. Right? There's something bigger going on here. It's more than just a wedding situation. It goes with everything Jesus has been talking about the past several weeks. He says, when he comes, be ready. Be ready. And this is an ultimate decision. There'll be a time when the door is shut. We're going to talk more about that ultimate decision next week when we look at the last part of this passage, how much that means. But for now, Jesus tells this story using that first century situation to help us understand the need to be ready. Now, what are we getting from this story here? Can I share two things? First of all, this story reminds us that Christians have one calling. One calling. I saw a video recently where a new car was on a truck as it was arriving at the buyer's home. It was a nice car, and it was going to be taken off the car for the owner to take delivery. And the owner was so excited, he'd been waiting for it. He was videoing the truck's arrival and looking forward to getting into the new car. But in the video, you're seeing the car come off the truck, and as the car came off the truck, it got damaged. It got smashed up. And somehow the video has been shared, and you look at that, you're thinking, oh, you wince. You think, oh, they had one job. They had one job, right? Why couldn't they do the one job? In the Bible, in the New Testament, we were given the one job description. First of all, for those of us who are part of church, leaders have one job, right? We have that role description. There's a job description for elders. There's a job description for deacons, right? But it's not just for church leaders. Actually, all Christians are given a job description. All Christians take on the words of Jesus when he says, go and make disciples, right? Teaching them everything that I've taught you, right? Teaching them to obey it. All of us have that job description. No matter where we are in our faith, if we're part of church, we have one calling. I say calling instead of job because when we think of job today, we think of, well, there's my job, it's over here, and then there's the rest of my life. But I think the word calling is better because this is something that is for all of our life. So it's not just a Sunday thing or a certain time of the week. God's given us this calling to go out and live out our faith so that it impacts others and points them to Jesus. We all have that one job. Now what happens is that sometimes like those foolish young women, it's not enough to show up. They showed up, yes. They had the torch. They had their initial supply of oil. And maybe they just assumed it was going to be a little while and the bridegroom would show up. Maybe they just thought that the oil that they had would be enough. So if I just show up with what I've got, that's enough. But come to find out, it took longer than they thought it would. The whole process went beyond their expectation. And they needed to be better prepared. That reminds us that we're on God's time here. We're on God's time. Just as the foolish ones thought it wasn't going to be that long, right? They also thought that they could quickly go out back to the shops, get some more and come back in time. And they were off. They were wrong. It was too late. The door was shut. In both situations, they thought they had their own view of time. But actually, the bridegroom, it was he that had set the time. And it was too late for them. We're on God's time, and we always need reminders of this. The fact that the time that we have is not our own, but it is what's given to us from God. And as we said last week, none of us know when Jesus comes back. None of us know how much time we have. And so again, the time I have is from God. And that really challenges my view of time. The time that we give to our work, the time that we give to our leisure, the time that we give pursuing our own pursuits. It challenges me that this is actually God's time and not my own. Now, this past story taught us about being ready, the importance of being ready. And we want to see more about what that readiness looks like. I want to be growing and being faithful, right, to my calling, faithful in the way I use my time. I need to grow in being wise. What does it look like to be wise? So we come to this second story about the master and his 3 servants and their investments. I got a picture here of the 3 servants with the master who's come back. So in this story, the master has these 3 servants. They're basically his slaves in that first century context. And he's going away, but before he goes away, he gives each of them some of his property to invest, to grow. It says that he gives them talents. Now, in those days, a talent meant a large unit worth a lot of money. It was something that was measured by weight. So we don't have an actual money amount. But what we do know is, imagine a bag of gold, a bag of silver, a bag of coins, worth a lot of money, multiple times someone's income each year. It was a small fortune. That's one bag, one talent. And so 5 is a lot. That's a large fortune. 2 is not insignificant. That's quite a lot as well. And even 1 is substantial. It's not nothing. He gives them this weight of resource with the intention that they would grow it. It says that he gives it to them according to their ability. Now that's interesting. He gives them talent according to their ability. Now today, this might be confusing because we combine the meanings of talent and ability today, right? But in those days, the talent was the weight of value of the resource. The ability has to do with capability. So if I can put it together, God is giving certain skills and a certain amount of power to employ them. God's given us abilities and capabilities, okay, today. And the master gives it to them, and while he's away, the first 2 servants, they work on the investment so that the investment is doubled. I won't ask us to talk about this out loud, but what would it take to double the investment? Right? I don't think this was a passive kind of investment where you just let the money accrue over time, kind of set and forget. I don't think it was that kind of investment. I think it involved putting it into business and managing it or making sure that it's productive. So it's not a passive investment. I think there was a lot of time and effort given to it. If you've had a situation where your money has doubled over time, maybe it was passive, but in this situation, I definitely think it was an active situation where they had to put time and effort into it. What would it take to double that investment? You'd have to keep an eye on it. You'd have to make inquiries. You'd have to check. You'd have to think how to be more efficient. You would not just let it taper off. You would want to keep coming back to it to double that investment. It wouldn't have happened overnight. It's not like the fantasy of Powerball or Lotto, right? Of getting rich quick. It took time. But they doubled the investment, and the master comes back to settle accounts. So he's given them the resource. He does it thoughtfully, according to their ability, and he is valuing now what have they done with it. The first one comes to him and shows him the 5 plus the 5 that had grown, that had come in. The second servant comes with the 2 talents and the 2 other talents that had come in through his work and faithfulness and wisdom. And what does the master say to them? He commends them. And he says a couple of interesting things here. He says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Right? You have done what I've asked you to do. You've not given up. You've poured effort and time into growing what I've given to you. Well done. But he says a couple of things here. He says, you have been faithful over a little. Now, remember we said 1 talent was like a small fortune, right? He says to the servant with 5 talents, this is a little that you've been faithful with. What does that tell you about the master? If he considers the 5 talents little, right, how much more does the master have in resource and wealth and opportunity? He's super, super rich. And he says, you've been faithful over little, I will set you over much. So that's interesting because the reward for this wise servant is to be given more responsibility. Okay? Now, sometimes at work, that might be a burden to us. Great. Okay, I've done a good job. Now you're going to give me more work to do. At work, that might feel like a burden. But not in this situation, because look at what he says next. He says, enter into the joy of your master. In other words, it's not just a drudgery to do this kind of work. The master says, I am happy. I'm joyful over this business. And I'm giving you more opportunity to share in my joy, my happiness, right? There's nothing better than that, to share in the joy of the one that you're serving. So it's not just more toil. This is something that is so valuable, so exciting, so good. We're going to rejoice over it. It's going to be great. Then we have the third servant who says something very different. And it shows you something about his mind, about how he views the work and how he views the master. He says, Master, I know you're a hard man. I know you're tough, right? You're all about business. I know that you reap where you do not sow and gather where you do not scatter. What he means there is that the master is so rich that he puts money towards work. He himself is not doing the work, but he allocates money towards it and expects a return off that work, right? That's what he does with his investments. And the servant says, I know that this is how you operate, right? He says, so I was afraid. In other words, I could have invested this money, but it would be risk. It would be a risk for me to do so. I might lose. So I don't want to lose it. So I'm just going to bury it in the ground. And now you're back. Here you go. It's back to you. All right? If you're very conservative when it comes to money, you would understand something of this thinking. But it's more than just avoiding risk. It's more than just avoiding risk. When he says this, what he's saying really is, this is not mine. This is your money. All right? It's just going to pay off for you. And since I don't want to make it worse for myself, I'm just going to let it sit. I'm not going to do anything with it. And at least you can have it back. Right? He has totally missed his purpose as a servant. He was given something with the purpose of growing it, of making more out of it. He's totally missed the purpose. He's even missed the kind of person that the master is. The master says, in response, he says, so you know that I reap where I do not sow and gather where I do not scatter. Then you should have taken that money to the bank so that I could at least get some interest of it. In other words, the least you could have done was to let it sit in the bank, let it sit where there'd be something, anything, some kind of little interest rate that I get something more. But you didn't even do that. That's why he calls him wicked. That's why he calls him lazy. In the servant's mind, he's hasn't caused a loss for his master. He's kept the original talent. But his view of himself is wrong, actually. The master says, you're wicked and slothful. And just like the previous story, it's an ultimate decision because the master says, throw this servant out into the darkness where there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is more than just an employment story. This is an eternal destination story. And again, we'll land there more next week about the ultimate decision that everyone must make. Well, what does this mean for us today? Again, two things here. This is a story about money, and we can get some wisdom about money here, but that's not really the point. This is a spiritual story, and the point is, as one Christian says, our task while we wait for Jesus is to improve our master's assets, not our own. And that's so clarifying for us. Yes, we have been given opportunities, career, resource. We have work to do to provide for our families and to plan ahead, prepare ahead for their future. But we are part of a much bigger picture. We have a much greater purpose if we're following Jesus. It's not about finishing my life just to make my own life and my family's life more prosperous. Jesus says, what are you doing with what I have given you for my kingdom? Jesus' kingdom, not my little kingdom. That's our task. That's clarifying for us because every week we get distracted about how we can prosper, how we can make more comfortable our own little kingdom. And so Jesus calls us back to the clarity about who is our master and what is the work that he's given us to do. Then he's also given all of his people this gracious invitation to share in his joy. And I find this fascinating, that God not only values what you're doing with what he's given to you, but what he's after is your own heart, that you would be joyful in serving his kingdom. He says, enter into the joy of your master. One Christian said, Christ is hard to satisfy and easy to please. What does he mean by that? The fact that God is perfect, is infinite, and therefore his requirement, his righteousness is perfect, hard to satisfy, in fact impossible to satisfy God's standard. But at the same time, Jesus is easy to please. In other words, he's ready, waiting, willing to say, well done, good and faithful servant. Share with me in my joy. Hard to satisfy, easy to please. He loves to say, well done. And that's where I'd like to land here this morning, if I can share this here. These words from the story, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into your master's joy. The young women in the first story, they failed because I think they thought it was too easy and they lost sense of time. In the second story, the wicked servant, he fails because he thought it was all too much. It was all too hard. And so he buries it. He gives up on it. But Jesus calls us, he invites us to be clear about who we're living for, what we're doing with our life and our time. And he puts in front of us a future where you stand before God and you might hear these words from God about you. Well done, good and faithful servant. It's incredible to think about that God would say these words about you and me. We can't help but think about the way that we spend our time, how we use our resources. And if we're open and honest before God, we could maybe identify habits or ways where we are not yet living the good and faithful servant life. We may be wasting what God has given to us. We may be holding on, clutching to what God has given to us instead of using it for God's kingdom. Sometimes we see words like this and we think, how could this ever be me? That God would say these words to me. I'm reminded of Jesus' words and another message where he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." One danger is to assume that we're doing everything for God, and these stories help us to be more clear about where we're falling down. But the other extreme is to beat ourselves up so much because we don't measure up to good and faithful, and we've wasted so much, and we wonder how much time we have left and what can we do. Come back to Jesus' words where he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." That's actually the best place to start. Or if you can say, actually the truth is, I have not been a good servant, I've not been faithful, I'm far from being wise, that's a great place to start. I've wasted what God's given to me, right? Because if I can say, God, I'm spiritually bankrupt, really. I don't have anything in these hands really to give to you. Jesus says that is the path to blessing. The truth is, all of us have empty hands before God. There's nothing in ourselves that we can produce that will earn that satisfaction from God. We start by being poor in spirit. Let me pray with you. Father, what a glorious future Jesus has laid out for us today. That we might hear these kinds of words from God. The well done. The commendation. We marvel at it, God. God, you know all things. You see our foolishness, our selfishness. If our record is who we really are, then we're all finished before you. We come to you with empty hands. There's nothing within us that is so good that you would accept us. We're poor in spirit, God. And we pray that as we come to you empty, that you would fill us with your love. That we'd look again to Jesus, the truly good and faithful servant, who gave his life for our foolishness, for our wastage, for our selfishness, who overflows in forgiveness because he's given his life for our sake. And Lord, help us to be more clear about time, about what you've given into our hands. Keep us from the assumption that our time is our own, that we can spend as we please. Lord, help us to make that next step where we can say, you are worthy of it all. In Jesus' name, amen.